Welcome, friend. You have found your way here at the end of another long day, and there is nothing more you need to do now. If you can, lie down. Let the lights be low, or let them go out altogether. Pull the blanket up to where it feels kind, and let your body settle into the shape it wants to hold all night. This story will go on softly for hours, and it is made to be slept through, so let it play and let it carry you. If you drift away in the middle, that is not a loss. That is the story doing its work. Let your breath slow now, in gently, out, a little longer. There is nothing to decide tonight, nothing to remember, nothing to hold on to. If these long nights of old myth bring you rest, you are welcome whenever you like to subscribe, so the stories can find you again on other evenings. And that is all. Now the world grows quiet, and we begin. Long ago, and longer ago than that, before the first of your grandmothers had a name, the people of the north lay down in the dark of winter and told one another of a tree. Not a small tree, and not a tree that any walker could find, but a tree so vast and so patient that all the worlds rested in its branches the way snow rests on a bough. Softly, without weight, they called it Yggdrasil, the world tree, and they said its roots drank from wells older than memory, and its crown held up the slow wheel of the stars. When the wind moved through it, whole ages sighed. When its leaves stirred somewhere far below, a tide turned over in its sleep. Tonight you can imagine that tree standing in a blue and endless dusk. There is no hurry anywhere in it. Dew gathers on its leaves, drop by drop, and falls into the valleys of the worlds as rain, and the rain becomes rivers, and the rivers become mist, and the mist climbs back up through the branches, and everything moves in one slow breath, the way your own breath is moving now. Among the branches of that tree lay the 9 worlds, each in its own cradle of shadow and light. High in the crown, wrapped in pale gold, was Asgard, the home of the gods, with its long halls and its quiet orchards, and its roofs of silver thatch that caught the starlight and held it. Below, in the middle of everything, green and brown, and threaded with smoke from evening fires, lay Midgard, the world of men and women, your world. The world where someone very much like you once lay under woolen blankets listening to a story, very much like this one. And out at the cold edges, where the light thinned into a soft gray, lay Jotunheim, the land of the giants, all mountains and mist and slow rivers of ice, older than the gods, patient as stone. Between the worlds ran roads that only some could travel. There was a bridge of many colors, trembling like light on water, that joined Asgard to the lands below, and a watchman stood at the top of it, calm and golden-eyed, listening to everything, for his hearing was so fine that he could hear the wool growing on the backs of sheep and the grass unfolding in the dark. His name was Heimdall, and you may keep him in mind, standing quietly at his bridge in the starlight, for he belongs to the very end of this story, and the end is a long, long way off, and there is no need to hurry toward it. For now, only rest in the picture of it all. The great tree breathing, the worlds cradled, the bridge glimmering. Somewhere an eagle sits at the very top of everything with the wind combing through its feathers, and somewhere far below, a slow serpent lies coiled among the deepest roots, dreaming, and between them squirrels and stags, and quiet unseen things move through the branches on their small errands, unhurried, as the long dusk deepens into night. And through those cradled worlds, in the time we are speaking of, there moved one figure who could not stay still. All the other powers of that age had their places. The gods kept their halls. The giants kept their mountains. The dwarves kept their glowing forges under the hills, and the elves kept their meadows of pale light. But this one belonged to no single place, and every door in every world had, at one time or another, opened to his knock. He was quick where everything else was slow. He was laughter in halls that had grown solemn. He was the flicker at the edge of the fire, the wind that changes direction, the thaw that loosens the ice in spring. His name was Loki, and tonight, while you sink a little deeper into your pillow, we will follow his whole long story, from the bright beginning to the strange and quiet end, and past the end, into the green morning that waits on the far side of everything. You do not need to follow closely. The story knows its own way. Let your eyes be heavy. Let the tree hold the worlds, and let the worlds hold the story, and let the story hold you. No one in Asgard could ever quite say where Loki had come from, and perhaps that was the first of his riddles. The old tellers said his father was a giant called Farbauti, whose name meant something like the striker, the way lightning strikes a dry tree, and that his mother was called Lofe, a name soft as leaves, and some said she was slender and gentle as a birch in summer. So Loki was born, as it were, where lightning touches leaves, and what is born there is fire, not the great roaring fire that eats forests, but the quick, clever fire of the hearth, the flame that dances and changes shape, and is never the same from one heartbeat to the next. The flame you have watched on winter nights until your eyes grew heavy, the way they may be growing heavy now. He was of giant blood then, from the cold outer lands, and yet there was nothing cold about him. He was slight and bright-eyed and handsome, and his mind moved the way light moves on water, touching everything, resting on nothing. Where the gods thought in years, Loki thought in moments. Where they built walls, he found doors. And he had one gift that not even the wisest of them shared, a gift as old as fire itself, which is always changing and never still. Loki could leave his own shape behind the way you leave your shoes by the door. He could pour himself into the body of a falcon and feel the wind holding him up. He could shrink into a fly, small as a spark, and drift on the warm air of a forge. He could be a seal in the gray waves, a salmon in a cold river, an old woman by a roadside, a wisp of smoke slipping under a door. Nothing about him stayed fixed, and this in the end is both the joy of his story and the sorrow of it. But the sorrow is far away yet, and the night is long, and there is nothing to do but listen. In the young days of the world, before most of the stories had happened, Loki met Odin. Odin was the oldest of the gods, the deep one, the quiet one, with one eye that saw everything and one eye given away long ago, in exchange for wisdom, drowned in a well beneath the roots of the great tree. Odin wore a wide hat and a cloak the color of rain clouds, and he walked the world slowly, listening, gathering knowledge the way a river gathers rain. And when this slow, deep god met the quick, bright flame from the edge of the world, something in each of them recognized the other. Perhaps deep water has always loved firelight. Perhaps the one who sees everything was glad, for once, to be surprised. However it happened, the old tellers agree on this. Odin and Loki swore an oath to one another in the oldest way there was. They opened their palms and let their blood run together into one footprint in the earth, and they mixed it, so that from that day the same life moved in both of them, and they called each other brother. And Odin swore, with the whole sky listening, that he would never take a drink at any feast unless a drink was poured for Loki too, that no door in Asgard would be opened to him and closed to his brother. It was a great oath, and a strange one, water binding itself to fire, and the world would turn on it for ages after, the way a great door turns on one small hinge. So Loki came up the shimmering bridge into Asgard, past the golden watchman who looked at him a long moment with his calm, far-hearing eyes. and the halls of the gods open to him. Imagine him arriving there in the long northern evening, when the sky stays pale for hours, and the shadows are soft and blue. Imagine the high roofs, and the smoke rising straight up in the still air, and the sound of a feast somewhere, low voices, a harp, the clink of cups. Loki walked into all of it as if he had always belonged, and in a way that no one could explain, he did. And you should know, before your thoughts grow too soft to hold it, that the gods came to be glad of him, at least in those first long years. Asgard before Loki had been a solemn place, mighty and slow, like a hall of old kings. Loki was the one who made Thor laugh until the benches shook. He was the one who could tease a smile from Odin's gray silence. When the god sat heavy with some problem, turning it over and over like a stone too large to lift, it was Loki who slipped in among them and found the crack in it, the small, clever way through that no one else had seen. The old tellers said of him that he was fair of face and sharp of mind, and that his counsel was sometimes crooked and sometimes kind, and that the gods used him the way you use fire, gratefully and a little carefully, keeping it on the hearth. There were long golden years then, and the stories from those years are the ones we will walk through first, slowly, one after another, the way you might walk through quiet rooms in a house at night. Trouble comes into some of them, but in those days, trouble was like weather. It blew in and it blew out again, and the halls were always warm afterward. So let go of anything you are still carrying from your own day. Set it down beside the path. In the story it is early yet, and the orchards of Asgard are heavy with apples, and someone has just put more wood on the fire. And Loki is young and welcome and bright, lying in the grass with his hands behind his head, watching the slow clouds, thinking, as he always was, of something no one else had thought of yet. Life in Asgard in those years moved like a long summer. The gods kept their days full of slow, good things. Odin walked and watched and learned. Frigg, his queen, sat spinning clouds at her wheel, and it was said she knew every fate in the world, and spoke of none of them, which is its own kind of peace. Bragi told stories by the fire, and Idun kept the orchard where the apples of youth grew, going out each evening among the trees with her basket, touching each apple gently, as if counting sleeping children. Thor, the thunderer, big as a hillside and warm as one in the sun, came and went from his travels in the east, and his cart rumbled across the sky, and folk in Midgard heard it and said, "There is Thor going home," and turned over, comforted, in their beds. And through all of it wove Loki, like a bright thread through gray wool. It has to be said, and the old tellers always said it, that his tricks did not always stay small. He was fire on the hearth, but even hearth fire sends up sparks. He would take a thing that was not his, just to see if he could, and put it back before morning. He would tell one god a secret that belonged to another, just to watch the ripples spread. He would vanish for a season, wearing wings or fins or fur, and come back with strange news from the edges of the world, and no explanation at all. The gods scolded him and forgave him, scolded him and forgave him, in the steady rhythm of a tide. Because whatever trouble he stirred with one hand, he smoothed away with the other, and because the halls were simply brighter when he was in them. If you have ever known someone like that, you know how it was, and if your thoughts are already blurring at the edges, let them blur. The story holds its own shape, even when you don't. Now, of all the dwellers in Asgard, one of the kindest to look upon was Sif, the wife of Thor. Her hair was the wonder of the 9 worlds. It fell past her waist like a field of ripe barley in the last light of evening, gold upon gold upon gold, And when she unbound it and combed it out, the whole hall seemed to fill with late summer. The old tellers said the harvest itself lived somehow in that hair, that the shining fields of Midgard were its reflection, and that when Sif walked through the orchard with her hair loose on the wind, even the apples leaned toward her. Thor loved her the way the sky loves the earth, simply and completely, and without ever thinking about it. And perhaps that is what caught at Loki, in the strange, restless part of him. It is hard to say at this distance, in this soft dark, why he did what he did next. Perhaps it was envy, or mischief grown a size too large, or only the fire in him flaring up the way fire does at night when everyone else is asleep. The story does not explain him. Stories rarely explain anyone. It only says that on a certain night, when Asgard lay silent under the slow stars, and even the watchman at the bridge had turned his eyes outward to the dark, Loki went quietly, more quietly than falling snow, into the hall where Sif lay sleeping. She was deep in her dreams, her breathing slow and even, the way yours is becoming now, and her golden hair lay spread across the pillows like sunlight that had decided to rest. And Loki took out a small blade, and softly, gently, so gently that she never stirred, he cut it all away, every shining strand. He gathered the gold up in his arms, the way you would gather cut barley, and he slipped out into the night with it, and the door closed behind him without a sound. And Sif slept on, dreaming of summer, not knowing that summer had been carried out of the room. It was not a kind trick. Even Loki, walking under the cold stars with his arms full of gold, may have felt the first small weight of that, like a pebble dropped into a deep well, falling and falling. But remember, this is a story in which broken things get mended, at least for a long while yet. Hold on to that loosely, the way you hold anything at the edge of sleep. Morning is coming to Asgard, and with it a small storm, and after the storm, wonders. When Sif woke in the pale morning and put her hand to her head, she found only softness, short as new grass after mowing. She did not cry out. The old tellers say she sat very still by the window for a long time, watching the light move across the orchard, and that her quietness was harder to bear than any weeping would have been. When Thor came in and saw her, his face went through all the weathers at once, and the sky over Asgard darkened, and far away in Midgard the farmers looked up from their fields and said to one another, "Storm coming," and led the animals in early. Thor did not have to wonder who had done it. No one in Asgard ever had to wonder. He found Loki by the wall in the gray light, and he picked him up the way the wind picks up a leaf, and he said, in a voice like far-off thunder rolling closer, that Loki would put back every strand of what he had taken, or answer for it. And Loki, dangling there with his quick mind running like water in every direction at once, did what he always did at such moments. He made a promise larger than the trouble. "Set me down," he said, "and I will bring Sif hair of real gold, finer than what she lost, living gold that will grow from her head like true hair, and shine brighter than the harvest. Set me down, and I will bring gifts for the gods such as the worlds have never seen." And Thor, who was never angry longer than a storm lasts, set him down. That was the way of things between them in those years. The thunder passed over, and the air came clear, and there was work to be done. So Loki went down from the bright thin air of Asgard, down through the roots of the mountains, into the deep places of the world where the dwarves lived. And you may go down with him in your mind gently, one slow step at a time, because the way down is a sleepy way. The light of the sky faded behind him to a small pale coin, and then to nothing, and the dark that took its place was not a frightening dark, but a warm one. a wool thick dark that smelled of stone and iron and old smoke. Far off in it, like the first stars of evening, glowed the doorways of the forges. The dwarves were the makers of everything fine in that age. The gods had power, and the giants had size, but the dwarves had craft, patient and perfect. They lived in halls of carved stone, lit by the deep red light of their furnaces. And they worked the way rivers work, without hurry and without stopping, and the ringing of their little hammers ran through the roots of the mountains. Tink and tink and tink, a sound so steady and so old that the mountains themselves had learned to sleep to it. And you may sleep to it too, whenever you are ready. Loki came first to the sons of Ivaldi, master smiths, and he leaned in their glowing doorway with all his brightness turned up warm. And he began to talk. And oh, Loki could talk. He told them of Sif's shorn head and the sorrow in Asgard. He told them that only the finest smiths in all the worlds could mend such a sorrow, and that everyone knew, everyone had always known, that the finest smiths were the sons of Ivaldi. He wove his words the way they wove their metals, soft and glittering, and the dwarves listened, and their eyes shone in the forge light, and they said, "We will make what you ask." Then the deep hall filled with the good sounds of making. The bellows breathed in and out, slow as a sleeping giant, and the coals brightened and dimmed, like something with a heartbeat. The sons of Ivaldi took true gold and drew it out finer than spider silk, finer than the light of a single star on water. And they wove it strand by strand into hair, and they sang some quiet, unhurried song into it as they worked, so that it would take root and live and grow. When it was finished, it lay across their dark, work-worn hands like morning itself. And because making is sweet once it has begun, they did not stop there. They forged a spear that would always find its mark and never be turned aside. A gift for Odin, made of ash wood and starlight, and a name, Gungnir. And they built a ship, Skidbladnir, the best of ships, whose sails always found a fair wind the moment they were raised, and which folded up when its work was done, as small as a piece of cloth, so it could be carried in a pouch beside the heart. Imagine that, as your own breathing settles. A whole ship with all its masts and rigging and its memory of the open sea, folded soft and small, and put away in a pocket, the way the day you have just lived is folding itself now, sail by sail, and being put away somewhere safe. Loki gathered up the three wonders, the hair, the spear, the little folded ship, and he thanked the sons of Ivaldi in words that glowed like their own coals. And he turned to go, and if he had simply gone, this would be a shorter story, and a poorer one. But halfway down the stone passage, in the dark, between one forge light and the next, Loki paused. He had the gifts. He had the mending of his trouble in his two hands. And still the fire in him flickered, restless, wanting one thing more. Not gold. Loki never really wanted gold. He wanted the game. Deeper in the mountain there was another forge, and in it worked two brothers, Brokkr and Atri, and their craft was the equal of any in the worlds, and they knew it. Loki appeared in their doorway with the wonders of the sons of Ivaldi shining in his arms, and he held them up one by one, the hair, the spear, the folded ship, letting the forge light play over them, and he said, in the mildest voice you can imagine, that it was a pity, a very great pity, that nothing so fine would ever be made again in the deep places, for surely no smiths now living could match these three things. Brokkr looked at Atri, and Atri looked at Brokkr, and something passed between them, slow and heavy as the turning of a millstone. "We can make better," they said. And Loki smiled the smile that had opened 100 doors, and he made them a wager. If they could truly forge 3 gifts finer than these, he said, they could have his head, his own clever head, off his shoulders, theirs to keep. It was the kind of wager only Loki would make, because only Loki packed his escape inside his promises, the way the dwarves packed a ship inside a pouch. But the brothers took it and struck hands on it, and turned to their fire. Then Atri laid the first work in the furnace and said to Brokkr, "Only this one thing, brother. Whatever happens, keep the bellows moving. Do not stop. Do not slow. Do not falter, until I return and take the work out." And Brokkr set his hands to the bellows and began, and the great lungs of the forge breathed in and breathed out, and in and out, so deep and so even that the whole mountain seemed to be a sleeper. And the two of you, the mountain and you, may breathe together now for a while. But Loki had no intention of losing his head. Somewhere in the red gloom of that forge, he let his own shape fall away and became a fly, a single dark spark of mischief drifting on the warm air. And as Brokkr worked the bellows, the fly settled on his hand and bit him. Brokkr felt it, a small, sharp trouble, the kind of small, sharp trouble that visits everyone, even in the middle of good, steady work. And he did what the wise have always done. He noticed it, and he let it be, and he kept breathing, in and out. The bellows never slowed. And when Atri came back and drew the work from the coals, there in the tongs glowed a boar with bristles of pure gold, Gullinbursti, who could run through night and deep water faster than any horse, and whose shining back gave light in the darkest places, so that whoever rode him would never be lost in the dark. Keep that one near you tonight if you like. A golden warmth that runs ahead through the darkness, and the darkness is friendly, and the way home is lit. Atri set the second work in the furnace, gold this time, and again he said, "Keep the bellows moving," and again he went away, and again the fly came, and this time it bit Brokkr on the neck, twice as sharp. And Brokkr breathed, in and out, and let the small trouble pass over him like weather, and the bellows never slowed. And out of the coals came a ring, Draupnir, a plain-looking arm ring of deep gold with one strange virtue. Every 9th night 8 new rings dropped from it, each as heavy and fine as itself, wealth flowing quietly from wealth, the way one deep breath makes the next one easier, the way one good night's sleep makes another. Then Atri laid iron in the furnace, a great weight of it, and his voice was very quiet when he spoke this time. "This one matters most of all," he said. "Keep the bellows moving, whatever comes." And he went away, and Brokkr breathed for the fire, and the fly came a 3rd time, and this time it settled at Brokkr's eyelid and bit down until the tears ran, so that he could not see, and for one moment, only one, no longer than it takes a leaf to touch a pond, Brokkr lifted his hand from the bellows to clear his eyes. Then his hand was back, and the great slow breathing went on. But the fire had faltered, just that little, just that once. When Atri drew out the 3rd work, it was a hammer, iron, gray, and patient, and heavier than sorrow, with a head like a thundercloud and carvings on it like written lightning. It would never break, and it would never miss what it was thrown at, and however far it flew, it would always, always return to the hand that loved it. Its name was Mjolnir. One flaw it had from that one small faltering of the fire. Its handle had come out short, so that it must be held in a single hand, close in, near the heart. And the old tellers liked to say that the flaw was part of the gift, for what is carried close to the heart is never lost. Brokkr looked at the hammer for a long time. There in the dim red hall, and the fly that was Loki drifted somewhere above, very quiet now. Then the brothers wrapped the 3 gifts in soft leather, and Brokkr took them under his arm, and he and Loki went up together through the roots of the mountains, up toward the pale far light of Asgard, the smith walking slow and steady, the trickster talking, the way a stream talks going downhill, and neither of them changed the other's pace at all. In Asgard, the gods gathered to judge the gifts, in the long hall where the fires burned low and gold, and evening lay along the windows. Odin sat with his gray cloak loose about him, and Thor beside him with his arms folded, and Sif with a soft cloth over her head, and all the shining company around, and into the middle of them came Loki, unwrapping wonders. He gave the spear Gungnir to Odin, and Odin turned it slowly in the firelight and said nothing, but his one eye was thoughtful, the way deep water is thoughtful. He gave the folded ship to Frey, lord of summer and rain, who unfolded a corner of it and smelled the open sea and smiled. And then Loki came to Sif, and for once the old tellers say he was quiet, and he laid the woven gold gently against her head. And it took root. It flowed down over her shoulders, living and warm, brighter than what she had lost, real hair of real gold, growing. And the hall was very still, and Thor looked at his wife with the last of the storm going out of him like embers settling. And somewhere outside the first stars came out over the orchard. What is broken can be mended. Hold that loosely at the soft edge of your thoughts. In this part of the story, what is broken can be mended finer than it was. Then Brokkr the smith stepped forward with his 3 gifts and gave the ring Draupnir to Odin and the golden boar to Frey. And last he set the hammer Mjolnir in Thor's 2 hands. And the hall drew one long breath together, for the gods had lived all their lives with the cold lands at the edge of the world and the wild things beyond the walls. And here at last was a shield made in the shape of a hammer, a promise that the halls would stay warm and the orchard safe, a roof tree for the whole sky. Thor held it close, near his heart, where the short handle asked to be held, and from that day the thunder that rolled over Midgard was not a fearful sound but a guarding one, and mothers told their children, "Hush now, that is only Thor, keeping the fences of the world," and the children slept. So the judgment fell, and it could not have fallen otherwise. The hammer was the finest of all the gifts, and Brokkr and Eitri had won the wager, and Loki's clever head was forfeit. Now you may be sure Loki had never intended to pay, and here his mind did its quickest work of all the evening. When Brokkr came to claim what was owed, Loki held up one finger and made the smallest, sharpest point in all the old stories. "My head is yours," he said. "That was the wager, and I keep my word. But my neck was never in the bargain. Not one smallest part of my neck may you touch." And the gods looked at one another around the fire, and the corners of their mouths moved, and even Odin's one deep eye had light in it. For a head cannot be taken without a neck, and so it could not be taken at all. The dwarf turned it over and over, like a stone with no crack in it, and found that the trickster had escaped through a door made of words, as he always did, as he always would, until the one day, far away yet, when there would be no more doors. Still, Brokkr would not go home with nothing, and the story gives him one small, strange satisfaction. If he could not have the clever head, he would at least quiet the clever mouth for a while. With an awl and a leather thong he stitched Loki's lips closed, softly, firmly, the way you sew shut a pouch, and he went back down under the mountains to his brother and his fire, content, and Loki stood at the edge of the hall with his mouth sewn shut and his eyes bright above it. And after a moment he pulled the thong loose, for nothing held Loki long in those days. And the mark it left was only a thin pale line, like a horizon. But something quiet happened in that hall that is worth carrying down into sleep with you. For a little while, the god of talking could not talk, and the feast went on around him, the fires murmuring, the cups going round, Sif's new hair glowing down the length of the table, like a river of evening light, and Loki simply sat in it all, silent, and looked. The old tellers never say what he thought. Perhaps for one warm hour, the restlessness in him lay down like a dog by the fire. Perhaps silence tasted stranger to him than any wonder from the forges. It does not matter now. The hall is warm, the gifts are given, the trouble is mended, and everyone in the story, for tonight at least, is exactly where they belong. Let your breath grow slower still. There is more story, much more. But it comes to you now the way waves come to a shore that is already half asleep. The years went by in Asgard the way clouds go by on a windless day. And there came a time when the gods looked at their bright home and saw that it lay open to the wide gray distances. And they wished for a wall, a high wall, a patient wall, stone on stone, to hold the warmth in and the wildness out, so that every sleeper inside it could sleep a little deeper. Walls are an old wish. You are lying inside that wish right now, with your walls around you and your roof above you, and the night outside going about its own business, and none of it your concern. While the gods were still wishing, a builder came up the shimmering bridge. He was tall and quiet, with dust on his shoulders and a horse at his side, and he said he would build their wall for them, so high and so strong that no force in any world could trouble it, and he would do it in a year and a half. And his price, he said, was the sun and the moon and the hand of Freya, the loveliest of the goddesses, to take home with him as his wife. It was an impossible price, and the gods would have sent him away. But Loki leaned in among them, bright-eyed, and said, softly, "Wait. Make the bargain smaller and stranger," he said. "Tell him he may have his price only if the whole wall is finished in a single winter, with no one's help but his own. He will fail, of course. No one could do it. But by spring, we will have most of a wall for nothing." And the gods turned it over, and it glittered the way Loki's ideas always glittered, and they agreed. Only the builder asked one thing more, that he might use his horse to help him haul the stones. And Loki shrugged his light shrug, and the gods allowed it, and the bargain was struck, and every power in Asgard swore to it, and oaths in that world were not made of breath. They were made of the same stuff as the roots of the tree. Then the building began, and it was a wonder in itself, a slow, deep, rhythmic wonder, and you may watch it as drowsily as you like. All day the builder shaped and set the stones, and all night his great horse, whose name was Svadilfari, hauled them up from the mountains, stones the size of sleeping oxen, sledge after sledge through the blue snowlight. Day after day the wall rose, mortarless and perfect, and the winter went on turning overhead, the stars wheeling slowly, the snow falling and hushing everything, and the wall rose, and the winter waned, and the wall rose, and the gods, who had smiled at first, slowly stopped smiling. For with 3 days of winter left, the wall stood all but finished, needing only its gateway stones, and the builder whistled to his horse in the dusk, like a man who already knows what he is owed. The gods gathered in their hall, and there was no laughter in it. They could not break their oath, and they could not pay the price. A sky with no sun and no moon, all the worlds dark and cold forever, and gentle Freya carried away into the gray distances. And when they asked one another how such a bargain had ever been struck, every face in the hall turned slowly. the way a season turns, toward Loki. It was your counsel, they said, and it was quiet in the hall, and for once no door of words opened for him. So the god said simply this: "You talked us in, you will find the way out, or winter's end will be a sorrowful thing for you." And Loki looked around the ring of grave faces, and then he laughed his light laugh, and said, "Keep the fires lit," and went out into the snow, and no one saw where he went. That night, when the builder led his great horse out under the moon to haul the last stones, something came stepping delicately out of the birch woods. It was a mare, small and graceful, with a mane like gray silk and dark shining eyes. And she whinnied once, softly, and the sound went through the night air like a ribbon of warm breath. And Svadilfari, the mighty, the tireless, who had hauled half a mountain through the snow without ever once looking up, looked up. The mare turned and trotted back toward the trees, unhurried, and the great horse simply forgot everything he had ever known about stones. The harness slipped, the sledge stood still in the snow, and he went after her, into the birches, into the dark, and the sound of his hooves faded and faded until the night was only night again. All that night the builder called and searched, and all the next night, but the woods had closed around his horse like water around a dropped stone. And without Svadilfari, the last stones could not be moved, and the winter ran out quietly, the way sand runs out, and the wall stood unfinished by a gateway's width. The builder's patience ran out with it, and his true shape rose up. For he had been all along a giant of the mountains, huge and old and cold, and his anger shook the scaffolds. But his bargain was broken and his claim was gone, and Thor came out with the hammer that always comes home. And the giant went the way of winter itself when spring arrives. It passes. It is gone. Let it go like a dream at morning, because that is how the old tellers let it go. In half a line, turning already to the sweeter strangeness that came after. The sun stayed in the sky. The moon stayed in the sky. Freya stayed by her own warm fire, and the wall stood, all but a gateway, which the gods finished at their leisure, and Asgard was safe behind it, and everyone slept better, as you may now. As for the mare, she did not come back for many months. And when Loki at last returned to Asgard, walking over the new spring grass, he did not come alone. Beside him, on legs still learning what legs are for, came the strangest and loveliest foal the worlds had ever seen. Gray as morning mist, with 8 legs, as if movement itself had been given a body. For the mare in the birch woods had been Loki, of course. Shape poured into shape as only he could, and this foal was his own child, born of his own body, and there was no other creature like it anywhere. Odin took the foal and raised him gently, and named him Sleipnir, and in time he became the best of all horses, who could run on sea as if it were meadow and on air as if it were road, and carry his rider between the worlds, even down, when it was needed, to the quiet lands of the dead. Sleipnir, the 8-legged, whose gallop was smooth as sliding into sleep. When Odin rode him across the night sky, folk below heard nothing at all, only felt, perhaps, a soft wind pass over the roof, and dreamed of running effortlessly, the way you sometimes do, over fields with no fences, going nowhere, happily, forever. There is one more tale from the golden years, and it is the gentlest and most foolish of them all, the one the old tellers saved for nights when the listeners were already smiling into their pillows. It begins with Thor waking one morning and reaching out, as he always did, half asleep, to touch the hammer that lay beside him, and his hand found only the empty blanket. He searched the bed, and under the bed, and through the whole hall, his beard crackling with worry, and Mjolnir, the guardian of everything, the roof beam of the sky, was gone, stolen in the night, clean away. And here is the measure of how things stood in those years, that the very first thing Thor did was go and find Loki, not to accuse him this once, but to ask his help. For when something impossible had happened, Loki was the one who could think impossible thoughts back at it. And Loki went to Freya and borrowed her feather cloak, the falcon-shaped one that let its wearer ride the winds. And he put it on and poured himself into it, and rose over the walls of Asgard in the shape of a falcon, and flew out across the gray distances toward Jotunheim, the land of the giants, where the mountains sit wrapped in cloud like old men in blankets. He found the giant King Thrym sitting on a green mound in the pale northern light, plaiting golden collars for his dogs and trimming the manes of his horses, as calm as a man who has already won something. And Thrym looked up at the falcon and smiled a slow mountain smile, and did not wait to be asked. Yes, he said, I have taken the Thunderer's hammer. I have buried it 8 leagues deep, down where the roots of the hills drink, and no one will bring it up again unless they bring me Freya to be my wife. 8 leagues deep. Imagine how quiet it was down there, where the hammer lay in the dark cradle of the earth, resting among the slow roots, deeper than any sound of the upper world could reach. Even lost things in this story are only sleeping. Loki flew home with the feather cloak whistling softly, and gave his news. And first they asked Freya, and Freya said no. She said it in one word, and the walls agreed with her. And that was the end of that, as it should have been. So the gods sat all together in council, turning the trouble over, and it was Heimdall, the far-seeing watchman, wise as the quiet places he watched, who spoke the thought no one else would dare to speak. Let Thor go to Jotunheim, he said, dressed as the bride. There was a silence then of a very particular kind, and inside it Thor slowly understood what had been said. The Thunderer in a wedding veil. He rumbled, he protested. He said the gods would laugh at him until the end of all things, and he was right. They would. But there was no other way to bring the hammer home, and home it had to come. So the goddesses gathered around him with linen and brooches, murmuring and adjusting, the way people fuss over any bride, and they dressed the great god in a long gown, and hung the keys of a household at his waist, and laid bright stones across his broad chest, and over his head and his beard, and his storm-gray eyes they draped a veil, layer on soft layer, until nothing of him showed at all. And Loki, delighted beyond the telling of it, put on the dress of a serving maid and said he would come along as the bride's attendant, to do the talking. Of course he would do the talking. Talking was the country where Loki had been born. So they went to the mountains, the bride and the bridesmaid, in Thor's goat-drawn cart, and the peaks of Jotunheim leaned together over the road like grandparents over a cradle. And Thrym saw the veiled figure arriving and clapped his great hands, and his hall filled with lamplight and long tables for the wedding feast, and all his kin came in from the cold hills, and there was a warm, enormous rustling settling in, the way a hall sounds when winter is shut outside and everyone has found their bench. The feast, though, nearly foundered at once, for the bride was hungry. Under the veil, Thor ate a whole ox, quietly, and then 8 salmon, one after another, like a tide taking boats, and all the sweet cakes that had been set out for the women, and washed it down with 3 great vats of mead. And Thrym watched with his mouth slowly opening and said he had never in all his winters seen a bride eat like that. And the little bridesmaid leaned in, quick as firelight, and said in a soft, confiding voice, "She has not eaten for 8 days, so great was her longing for Jotunheim." And Thrym sat back, warmed through, entirely satisfied. Then he grew tender as bridegrooms do, and lifted a corner of the veil to steal a kiss, and met the bride's eyes, and let the veil fall again rather quickly, and said that her eyes were strange and terrible, like red coals. And the bridesmaid leaned in again, gentle as a lullaby, and said, "She has not slept for 8 nights, so great was her longing for Jotunheim." And Thrym nodded slowly, for he understood longing, and everything in the hall was, to him, exactly as it should be. That is its own small mercy in this old story, that for one evening even the lonely king of the cold mountains believed he was loved. At last came the moment the whole night had been folded around, for it was the custom in those days to bless a marriage with the hammer, and Thrym, glad and generous, called for Mjolnir to be brought up from its 8 leagues of sleep and laid in the bride's lap. And so it was carried into the hall, and so it was laid down, and the moment the hammer touched Thor's knees, the story simply stops describing the wedding. The old tellers turn their faces away here. And we may do the same, and let it all become what it becomes at this hour of night anyway. A dream dissolving, the veil drifted to the floor like snow sliding from a roof. Thunder walked through the hall, low and rolling. The lamps guttered once, and the mountain wind carried everything away, tables and lamplight and wedding and all, the way morning carries away a dream you were sure you would remember. And when the sky cleared, the cart was rumbling gently homeward with the 2 of them in it, the hammer riding safe between them, and Loki laughing so helplessly that even Thor, veiled in nothing now but his own tangled beard, began at last to laugh too, and their laughter rolled away over the empty miles like the last of the thunder, getting softer and softer until it was only weather, far away, over someone else's hills. Now the story turns, slowly, the way a long night turns past its middle, and its colors deepen. There is nothing here to trouble your rest. But the tellers always lowered their voices a little for this part. And we will lower ours, and you may sink a little deeper while we do. Loki had a wife in Asgard, the faithful Sigyn, quiet as an evening lake, and we will come to her tenderness much later, at the hour of the story that needs it most. But Loki was never only one thing, and never only in one place. And in his wanderings at the edges of the worlds, he kept another hearth, far in the east, in a dim old forest that the tellers called the Ironwood, where the trees stood dark and patient, and the light came through them the color of deep water. There lived a giantess named Angrboda, and with her, in that twilight so far from the gold of Asgard, Loki had 3 children, and there were never, in any world, 3 children like them. The first was a wolf cub, gray as rain, with solemn amber eyes, and his name was Fenrir. The second was a serpent, slender and dark and gleaming, who moved like water finding its way. And the third was a daughter, a girl called Hel, and she was quiet, quieter than snowfall, and strange to look upon, for one side of her was soft and living like any child, and the other side was dusk itself, still and shadowed, as if half of her had been made from the calm land where all stories rest when they are over. She did not laugh often, but she watched everything with great patience, and what she loved best was stillness. For a time the 3 of them simply grew, out there under the dark trees, the wolf cub tumbling through the ferns, the serpent drawing his silver lines through the pools, the quiet girl sitting among the roots watching the slow lights of evening move. But nothing that concerned Loki stayed hidden for long. Word of the children drifted up to Asgard the way smoke drifts, and with it came old prophecy, the deep murmuring kind that rose out of the wells beneath the world tree. The seeresses had said in their sleep, that from these three would come great turnings, that the wolf and the serpent were woven into the last chapter of the world, the far-off chapter, the one about the long night and the new morning, and the gods sat with that knowledge the way you sit with a letter you wish had not come. So Odin sent for the children, and they were brought up the shimmering bridge to Asgard, the cub, the serpent, and the quiet girl, and the gods gathered to look at them, and the children looked back. And what was done then was done gently, as the old tellers insist, and gently is how we will hold it, but it was also sad, in the way that even necessary things can be sad. And the sadness sank into the story like rain into earth, and watered what grew later. The serpent Odin lifted and carried to the shore of the world, and let him slide away into the great deep sea that rings all the lands. And the sea took him kindly. Down he went through the layers of green and gray and darkest blue, where everything is slow and soft, and there he grew year upon year upon year, until he was longer than any coastline, until at last he lay all the way around the world, like an arm around a sleeper, and took his own tail gently in his mouth, and was still. Jörmungandr they called him then, the World Serpent, and the tellers said the tides were his slow breathing, in and out, and in and out, and that as long as he held his tail and drowsed in the deep, the world was held together, encircled, complete. He is there now, in the story, holding everything in, including you. Let the tide of your own breath match his for a while. In and out. Nothing is falling apart tonight. The circle is closed, and the sea is calm. To Hel, the quiet daughter, Odin gave something no one expected. He looked at her a long time with his one deep eye, the eye that had seen every fate, and perhaps he saw how she loved stillness, and how stillness loved her. And he gave her a whole world. Down below the roots of everything lay the land where the dead go when their stories end, dim and vast and calm as the hour before snow. Odin set Hel over that land as its queen, and she went down to it without one word of complaint, and some say without one backward look, as if she were going home. There she built her halls, wide and shadowy and warm in their own gray way, and she kept them ready, and she received, ever after, all who came down to her, the old who had finished their long lives, the children who had barely begun theirs, the tired, the fevered, the lost at sea, everyone whose road ended quietly. She gave them places at her long tables. She was not cruel, whatever colder stories say. She was the keeper of rest. Her country was simply sleep that has no morning, and she tended it the way a good innkeeper tends an inn at the end of a long, dark road. Lamps lit low, beds made, no one turned away. Remember her kindness. Of all the things in this story, her kindness will matter most near the end, when the brightest of the gods comes down her road. But the wolf cub, Fenrir, the gods kept in Asgard, thinking it wisest to raise him where they could watch him grow. And he grew. Oh, how he grew! That, though, is its own tale, and it deserves its own quiet telling, and the fire needs mending first, and your pillow has grown warm, and there is no hurry at all, no hurry anywhere in the 9 slow worlds. Of all the gods, only one was unafraid to go near the growing wolf, and that was Tyr. Tyr was the god of oaths and of courage of the oldest kind, the kind that is very quiet and asks for nothing. Every day he carried meat to Fenrir, and stayed while he ate, and spoke to him in a low voice about small things, the weather, the geese going over, and the wolf came to know his step and the smell of his hands, and would lie down beside him in the grass, big as a hill of shadow, and sigh, the long sigh of a creature at ease. If there was ever a friendship in this story that asked nothing and hid nothing, it was that one. the solemn god and the fated wolf, sitting together in the long yellow evenings while Asgard murmured behind its wall. But Fenrir kept growing. Every day he was larger than the day before. And the prophecies out of the deep wells kept murmuring his name, and the gods watched him the way you watch a wide river rising slowly toward the top of its banks. They would not shed his blood, not in their own home, on their own bright grass, that they could not do. So they turned, as the worlds always seem to turn, to binding, to something that could hold. They brought out a great chain called lading, and they made it a game. Fenrir, they said, you are strong, but are you as strong as this chain? Let us bind you, and see. And the wolf looked at the chain and knew the measure of himself, and lay down amiably, and let them wind it round him. And then he stretched, only stretched, the way you stretch under your blanket, and the chain came apart like bread being broken. So the gods forged another, Dromi, twice as heavy, links thick as roof beams, and again they made it a game, and again the wolf allowed it, and this time he had to shake himself, once, like a dog coming out of a lake, and Dromi flew to pieces in the soft grass, and Fenrir wagged his great tail, because as far as he knew, this was a game he was very good at, and his friends were proud of him. Then the gods sent down to the deep places, to the dwarves, the patient makers, and asked them for something that could not break. And the dwarves, who understood better than anyone that the strongest things are soft, made a ribbon. It was called Gleipnir, and it was smooth as silk and thin as a shadow at noon, and it weighed nothing at all. And they made it, the tellers say, from 6 things that are not in the world: the sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. That is why you have never heard a cat walking and never seen a mountain's roots, because all of it went into Gleipnir long ago, all the world's impossibilities braided into one soft gray ribbon that could hold anything, forever. And there is something restful in that, if you let it settle. Even in the oldest stories, the unbreakable things are not iron. They are made of hush and shadow and breath, the very materials of this hour of the night. The gods took Fenrir out to a small island in a dark lake, a flat, quiet place where the water lay like pewter under the clouds, and they showed him the ribbon and made it a game one last time. But Fenrir looked at Gleipnir for a long, long time. He was not a fool, whatever else he was. Something in the ribbon's softness spoke to something deep in him, and he said slowly that he could win no fame from breaking a thread, and that if the thread was more than it seemed, then it was a trick, and he wanted no part of it. And yet, he said, and the whole story holds its breath here. And yet, so that no one may call me coward, I will let you bind me if one of you will lay his hand between my jaws while you do it, as a pledge that there is no deceit. And the gods stood very still on the quiet island, because every one of them knew there was deceit, and every one of them knew what the pledge would cost. And it was Tyr, of course it was Tyr, the friend, the oath-keeper, who stepped forward without any speech at all, and laid his right hand, his sword hand, his giving hand, gently between the jaws of the wolf he had fed from a bucket, when the whole world still felt safe. Then the soft ribbon was wound about Fenrir's legs, and the wolf stretched, and it held. He shook himself, and it held. The harder he strove, the softer and stronger it grew, the way some sorrows do, and at last he understood the game and the price of it, and his jaws closed, and Tyr paid the pledge, and from that day the god of oaths had one hand only, and never once, in all the ages the story ran, was he heard to complain of it, or to speak of that island at all. Some debts are simply carried quietly. the way night carries the world. They made the binding fast to a great stone sunk deep in the earth, and there Fenrir lay, and would lie for ages of ages, until the last chapter of everything. And this is where we soften what the old tellers left hard. Because it is late, and because there is another way to see it, and the other way is also true. A wolf, lying bound in a still place, year upon year upon year, becomes at last very like a wolf sleeping. The grass grew up around him. The rain came and went over him, and the snow lay along his back in winter like a white blanket, and melted in spring. From his quiet jaws, they say, there ran a little river, and its name meant expectation, which is the water of everything that waits. And he waited, drowsing through the centuries, dreaming his one long dream of the end and the freedom and the far green morning after, while the lake lapped the island and the clouds crossed the water, and nothing at all happened, softly, for a very long time. Let nothing happen to you now, too. You are not bound, only held, the way a blanket holds you. And being held, you may let go. And what of Loki, while his children were being settled into their strange, far places, the serpent into the sea, the daughter into the deep, the wolf onto his island of waiting? The story does not say what he felt. The old stories almost never say what anyone felt. They only show you the weather changing and let you understand. But you can see it if you watch him gently from here, from your warm bed at the edge of the tale. Something in Loki began, very slowly, to cool. It did not happen all at once. Nothing important ever does. He still sat at the long tables. He still traveled with Thor, and got them both into trouble and out of it again, and the halls still rang. Some nights with the laughter only he could start, but the laughter had begun to change, the way a fire changes late in the evening. It leaned less toward warmth and more toward the edges of things. His jokes found the sore places now, the vanities, the old regrets, and pressed there. He came late to feasts and left early, or came not at all, and was seen on the high paths at odd hours, walking alone with the wind pulling at him, looking out toward the gray east where the ironwood lay, where a dim hearth stood empty now under the patient trees. Perhaps it was the children. It would be enough. To be welcomed at every table, and to know all the while that your daughter keeps her lamps lit in the country of endings, because the bright company could not bear to look at her, that your son circles the world's edge alone with his tail in his mouth, that your other son lies drowsing in a soft gray ribbon on an island no one visits but the rain. Perhaps it was older than that, some hairline crack that had been in the vessel from the start, from the first mingling of fire and frost that made him. Perhaps it was simply what happens to quickness when it lives too long among the settled, the way a flame at the bottom of a lantern flutters against the glass. The tellers do not choose, and neither will we. It is late, and judging is daytime work, and we are only watching an old sorrow come on slowly, from very far away, the way you watch weather over someone else's hills. The gods felt the cooling, though they could not have named the day it began. Odin, who saw everything, saw this too, with the one eye that had read all the fates in the well, and said nothing, because what he had read could not be unread, and because Loki was his brother by mingled blood, and old oaths keep their own counsel. Frigg at her spinning felt a thread pull strangely now and then, and let it pass through her fingers, for she knew every fate and spoke of none. Only sometimes at the high table, a silence would open where Loki's laughter had been, and the gods would glance at his empty place, and the fires would settle in their hearths, and someone would begin a song a little too quickly. You have known seasons turn. You know there is a day in late summer, warm as any other, when something in the light says, quietly, that it is over now and the year has begun to lean toward the dark. No single leaf falls to mark it. Everything is still golden, but the geese know and begin to gather over the water, and their voices at dusk have that far cold sweetness in them. It was that season now in Asgard, though the orchard still hung heavy and the halls were still warm. The long summer of the gods was ending, not with any storm, but with a slant of light, a lengthening of shadows, a bright god beginning to dream uneasily in his sleep. For it was just then, in that turning season, that Baldur began to dream, and with Baldur's dreams, the story enters its deepest water, the saddest and the most beautiful of all the old tales. You do not need to brace yourself. It will come to you as sorrow comes in dreams, soft and already half forgiven, and it will pass through like slow clouds. And on the far side of it there is a green shore. Sink a little deeper now. Let your hands be heavy. The fire is low, and the tellers are speaking almost in whispers. Baldur was the son of Odin and Frigg, and he was the light of Asgard, and that is not a figure of speech. The tellers said that brightness actually came from him, gentle brightness, the kind that lives in the first hour after dawn, and that his hall was the one place in all the worlds where no untrue thing could be spoken, and that the whitest flower in the meadows was named for his brow. Where Baldur walked, arguments lay down like the wind at evening. He was the one every mother hoped her child would be like, and no one begrudged him being loved best. Because he was, and there was nothing to be done about it, and he wore it lightly, like linen. And this shining one began to have heavy dreams. Night after night he woke in the dark of his gentle hall, with the feeling of gray water closing over him, of a road going down, of a long table waiting in a land of dusk. He carried it quietly for a while, as bright people do. But dreams like that leave shadows under the eyes, and Frigg his mother saw, and Odin his father saw, and in Asgard the dreams of Baldur became a council matter. For in that world dreams were letters from what was coming, and no one doubted the handwriting. Odin himself rode down, on 8-legged Sleipnir, to the misty borders of Hel's country, to ask what was being prepared there, and what he learned in the mist we can leave folded in the mist, except this much, that he came back silent, and that the benches in Hel's hall, when he glimpsed them, were being decked as if for an honored guest, and the mead was already brewed. And Frigg, when she heard, did not weep. She stood up with her spindle still in her hand, and decided, in the way of mothers everywhere and always, that it simply would not happen, and that she would go herself and close every door in the universe through which harm could reach her son. And she did it. This is the part of the story that is almost a lullaby, and you can let it wash over you like one. Frigg went out through all the worlds, patiently, thoroughly, the way light goes into every corner of a room, and she asked for an oath from everything that exists. She asked fire, and fire swore it would never harm Baldur. She asked water, and water swore, every lake and rain and river of it. Iron swore, and every other metal. The stone swore, the earth itself swore. The great trees swore one by one, oak and ash and elm and rowan. The sicknesses swore, the poison swore. The birds and beasts and creeping things swore. The very ground he walked on promised to be soft to him. All things loved the light, and all things gladly gave their word to spare it. It took her a long time, and you may drift through the middle of it if you like, through the years of her patient going from door to door of the world, wind swearing, snow swearing, salt swearing, sleep itself swearing, and when she came home at last, her son could not be hurt by anything in creation, almost anything. Growing on an oak west of Asgard's halls, there was a little plant, a soft small guest of a plant that does not even stand in the earth like other plants, but rests in the arms of trees. The mistletoe. Frigg saw it on her long way home, and it seemed to her so young and so slight, so far from every harm, that asking it for an oath would be like asking a sleeping baby to promise not to topple a mountain. She let it be. Of everything in all the wide worlds, only the mistletoe never swore. Hold that gently and without any dread. In these old stories, there is always one small door left open. That's not carelessness. That is the shape fate takes, and even the gods lived inside it, the way you are lying inside your room, inside the night, inside the turning year. When it became known that nothing could harm Baldur, the gods, being in their way great children, made a game of the wonder of it. They stood him in the middle of the green assembly field, glowing and laughing, and they threw things at him, darts and stones and swung blades, and everything, keeping its oath, turned aside at the last breath and fell around his feet as gently as thrown flowers. It became the favorite pastime of Asgard, that impossible, tender game. The whole company gathered in the long evening light, tossing harm at their best beloved and watching harm refuse, and Baldur laughing brightest of all, unhurt and unhurtable in the middle of the ring. From a little way off it must have looked like what it almost was, a field full of gods showering one shining figure with everything they had, and all of it turning to petals. But one figure stood at the edge of the field, watching, and did not laugh. The cool thing in Loki had gone on cooling, season by season, and envy is a patient gardener. It hurt him in some bent, unspoken way, that there was one in the world who could not be hurt. It sat wrong in him that every hand in Asgard was full of flowers for Baldur, when his own children had been given the sea, the ribbon, and the dusk. None of this excuses what came next. But it is night, and we are telling this the old slow way, in which even the crooked are seen whole before they are seen crooked. Loki put on the shape of an old woman, and in that shape he went visiting, and found Frigg at her spinning, glad and at ease now that her work was done. And they talked, as an old woman and a queen will, of children and of worry, and the disguised one marveled at the game on the field, all those blades falling like petals, and asked, spinning the question out soft as wool, whether it was really true that everything in all the worlds, had sworn. And Frigg, whose heart was easy for the first time in years, said yes, everything, all but one small plant, too young and too slight for oaths, the mistletoe west of the halls, resting in the arms of an oak. It was such a small thing to say. She was safe, she thought, on every side. Even the wise, even the all-knowing, are only ever as safe as their gladdest moment. The old woman nodded and stayed a little longer for courtesy, and went out, and the door closed softly, and the spindle turned, and the afternoon went on being golden for a while more. West of the halls, in the arms of the old oak, the mistletoe was resting, small and green gold in the late light, thinking of nothing, the way plants think of nothing. And Loki came and stood under the oak and looked up at it for a while. Then he reached up and gathered it, gently enough, and carried it away, and as he walked, he shaped it, smoothing it into a little dart, slight as a reed pen, light as the wing bone of a bird. It hardly weighed anything at all. The heaviest things in the old stories never do. On the assembly field the game was at its height, the whole ring of the gods glowing in the low sun, the air full of that soft, impossible rain of turned-aside harm, and the laughter rolling easy, wave after wave. And at the edge of the ring, outside the laughter, stood Hodur. Hodur was Baldur's brother, and he was blind. He stood with his face toward the sound of the joy, listening, the way the blind listened, completely, and taking part in nothing because no one had thought to help him take part, which is a small sorrow that lives quietly inside the great one. And a voice came to Hodur's shoulder, warm and kindly, asking why he alone threw nothing in honor of his brother. And Hodur said, "Because I cannot see where he stands, and because I have nothing to throw." And the voice said, "Then I will give you both." And the little dart was set in his hand, light as a reed, and a hand came under his arm, steadying it, aiming it with great care. And the voice said, "Now," and Hodur, glad at last to be inside his brother's game, threw. And this once, nothing in the world turned it aside. Fire had sworn, and iron had sworn, and every stone and stream and sickness. But the small guest of the oak had never been asked, and it went where it was thrown. And Baldur, the light of everything, felt it come, and looked down at it with something like wonder. And then he lay down in the middle of the ring, quite slowly. The tellers say, the way the sun lies down in the sea, and his brightness went out of the field, and the game was over, and the age was over, and for a long moment there was no sound in Asgard at all. Let it be quiet here for a breath or two. You are warm, and you are safe, and this sorrow is thousands of years old, worn smooth as sea glass by every voice that has ever carried it. It cannot cut anyone anymore. It only shines darkly, like everything worn that smooth. The gods stood in their ring and could not speak, and could not weep yet either. And worst of all, the tellers say, they could not take vengeance on the spot, because the field was hallowed ground and its peace was sacred. So they had to simply stand there, each alone inside the same loss. Odin bent low over his son, and what he whispered into Baldur's hair no one has ever known. It is the most famous secret in all the North, a word no story records, and you may imagine it as gentle as you need it to be. Hodur stood with his empty hands open, understanding by the silence what he had thrown, and no one, in that first hour, even remembered him, which was perhaps its own mercy. And a place at the edge of the ring, where a warm, kindly voice had lately been, was empty. Then Asgard gave its light back to the world the only way there was. With a farewell, they brought Baldur down to the gray shore and laid him in his own ship. Hringhorni, the greatest of ships, on a bed piled deep with rich cloth and ringed with torches. His young wife Nanna looked on him once, and her gentle heart simply followed him. Quietly, the way a note follows a note in a song, and they laid her at his side, and no one thought it strange, and no one ever has. Odin bent and set on Baldur's breast the great gold ring Draupnir, the dwarf made wonder that gave forth 8 new rings every 9th night. Wealth without end laid down where wealth means nothing, which is what grief does. It gives its best away into the dark. And Thor stood by with his head bowed. And all the gods came, and the elves came, and even the giants of the frost came down from their gray distances. For every world had loved the light, whatever else divided them. They pushed the ship out at dusk, and set the fire in it, and Hringhorni went out on the tide with its one bright burning softly, and all along the darkening shore the peoples of every world stood and watched it go. And this is the picture the old tellers wanted left in you. Not the field, not the dart, but this, a calm sea at nightfall, a single warm light moving slowly away from the land, getting smaller and softer and lower on the water, until no eye on the shore could say the moment when it went out. The way you will not be able to say, tomorrow, the moment when you fell asleep tonight. The stars came out over the water, the tide breathed in and out along the pebbles, and somewhere far below and far away, in a dim hall decked and ready, Lamps were being lit along a long table, and a quiet queen, who was patience itself, and whose one side was dusk, stood at her door to welcome the brightest guest her country would ever keep. But grief in Asgard did not sit still, because hope had one road left, and the road went down. Frigg stood among the mourning gods and asked, "Who will ride to Hel's country for me, and ask the quiet queen to give my son back?" And Hermod stood up, another of Odin's sons, a slim, swift young god of whom the stories say little else, as if he had been kept all those ages just for this one errand. Odin gave him Sleipnir, the eight-legged, the child of Loki's strangest kindness, the only horse that could take that road in return, and Hermod mounted and rode down. 9 nights he rode, down and northward, through valleys so deep and so dark that he could see nothing at all, and the only sounds were the 8 soft hooves and his own breathing, and you may ride behind him as drowsily as you like. For the road to Hel in this story is not a fearful road. It is only long and dim and quiet, like the road you are on right now, the one that leads down through the layers of the evening into sleep. He came at last to a river with a bridge roofed in shining gold, and the maiden who kept the bridge said that 5 whole companies of the dead had crossed the day before and made less sound than this one living rider. And she let him pass, for his errand was love, and love has always been let through. And he came to the high gate of Hel's country, and Sleipnir gathered his 8 legs beneath him and simply rose over it, like mist stepping over a fence, and came down soft as snowfall on the other side. And there, in the long dim hall, on the highest bench, in the seat of honor, sat Baldur, not suffering, you understand. The old tellers are clear, and it matters at this hour of night. He sat at ease in the lamplit dusk with Nanna beside him and the mead before him, honored above every guest in the country of rest, only far away, and pale the way the moon is pale. The light in him turned down low like a lamp in a sleeping house. Hermod stayed the night there in his brother's quiet company, and in the morning he stood before the queen. Hel looked at him a long time, half of her soft and living, half of her dusk, and she was not unkind. Remember, she was never unkind. But she was the keeper of a deep law, older than the gods, the law that what comes down the long road does not go back up it, and she would bend that law only as far as it could bear. "If Baldur is truly loved as you say," she told Hermod, "then let it be proven, gently, by everyone. Let all things in all the worlds weep for him, everything, every creature, every stone. If all creation weeps, I will send him home. But if even one thing refuses, one single thing in all the wide worlds, then he stays with me, and my hall keeps its light." It was not spite. Some say it was even wisdom, the kind too old to look like kindness. And Baldur walked with his brother to the gate, and gave him the ring Draupnir to carry back to Odin, a greeting from the dusk to the daylight. And Nanna sent linen to Frigg, and gifts, and then the gate closed softly, and Hermod rode up the 9 nights of darkness with the ring against his heart. Then the gods sent word into every corner of everything, asking the worlds to weep Baldur home. And the worlds wept. This is, when you hold it up to the lamp, one of the most beautiful things in any story anywhere. The fires wept, softly hissing. Iron wept and stone wept, and if you have ever seen a cold blade or a boulder come in from frost into warmth, and go bright with beads of water, the old tellers say that is exactly what it looked like, and that all weeping since remembers it. The trees wept along every road. The birds wept in the birches, the mountains wept their slow springs, and the clouds gave rain, and the whole vast tree of the worlds hung heavy with tears like dew, every leaf of it, and it seemed the deep law itself was leaning, about to let the light come home. But in a cave in the hills, there sat a giantess who called herself Thok. And when the messengers came to her and asked for her tears, she looked at them with dry eyes and said, in a voice with old embers in it, that Baldur had never done anything for her, living or dead, and that hell could keep what she held. And she would not weep. One refusal in all the worlds. It was enough. The law stood, the gate stayed closed, and Baldur remained in the lamplit dusk, in the seat of honor, until the end of all things. And as you will hear before you sleep, the end of all things was kinder to him than anyone dared hope. As for Thok, the tellers say what you have perhaps already felt, through the wool of your drowsiness. That shape, too, was Loki, fire, who had wept with everything else in its hissing way when the weeping was general, would not weep on purpose, not even to undo what it had done. Why is a question for daylight, and daylight is far away, and no one has ever answered it anyway. Envy gone all the way to ash, some say, or the old cold grief about his own far-scattered children, turned outward at last. Or simply this, that Loki had spent his whole long life finding the one small opening in every perfect thing, the neck left out of the wager, the horse left in the bargain, the plant left off the list, and now, at the end of that road, he had become the opening in the world's one perfect grief, the single dry eye in a weeping universe. He slipped from the cave and was gone into the hills, and the messengers carried their answer home through the drizzling worlds. And in Asgard something finished breaking, quietly, the way ice lets go of a shore at night. After that Loki could not stay, and he knew it. There is a tale of one last feast in the sea god's hall, where he came in uninvited out of the night and stood in the doorway with the wind behind him and said aloud, one by one, all the sharp, true and untrue things he had been storing up for an age of the world, to every god and goddess at the table, until the benches were silent and the cups stood cold. And then he was gone again into the dark he came from. We will not sit through that feast tonight. It is made of exactly the kind of noise you are done with for today. It is enough to know that the last bridge was burned there by his own hand, with words which had always been his fire. Then Loki went away into the empty country, far from every road, and built himself a small house on a high bald mountain. And the house had 4 doors, one facing each direction of the world, so that he could see whatever came, from wherever it came. And there he lived alone with his watchfulness, which is the loneliest company there is. By day he took the shape of a salmon, and lay in the pool below a waterfall nearby, called Franang's Falls, deep under the white noise of the falling water, where the light came down green and broken, and the world above was only a shimmer. And in the evenings he sat by his fire, in his house of 4 doorways, and his mind, which could never be still, worked and worked at the question of how he might be caught, so that he could stay one thought ahead of it. And one evening, thinking that question, he took up flax and cord, and his clever fingers began to knot them, mesh after mesh after mesh. And when he looked down, he found he had invented something new in the world. A net, the first fishing net, the perfect tool for taking a salmon out of a pool. He had, as he had always done, found the one opening in the thing, and the thing this time was himself. They say he sat looking at it a long while, there in the firelight, his own doom lying finished in his lap, knot by knot, made by no one's hands but his. Then he saw through his southern door the far-off glimmer of the gods coming, for Odin had only to sit in his high seat to see every hidden place in the worlds. And a bald mountain is not a hiding place, it is an announcement. And Loki threw the net into the fire, and went out the door that faced away, and down to the pool, and put on the salmon shape, and sank into the green deep under the waterfall's white murmur. The gods came to the empty house and found the fire settling it. In it, the ashen ghost of the net, its clever crossing still visible in the embers, the way the shape of a dream stays a moment after waking. And Kvasir the Wise looked at the ash and read it and said, "This is a thing for catching fish, and whoever made it fears it. So let us make its brother." So the gods sat down together by Loki's own fire, and knotted flax all night, mesh after mesh, copying the embers, and there is a strange soft justice in that picture. The whole shining company bent quietly over the trickster's last invention, learning from him one final time, their shadows moving slow on his 4 closed doors. In the morning they dragged the pool. The salmon pressed himself to the bottom between 2 stones, and the net passed over him, and they weighted it and came again, and he felt the world narrowing, water and mesh above, stone below, the way a long life narrows at last to a single evening. And he did what the quick have always done when the slow have finally learned patience. He gambled everything on one leap. Up out of the pool he went, silver and shining in the gray morning, in a high arc over the net toward the free water below the falls. It was, the tellers say, a beautiful thing to see, that leap. Even then, even at the end, he was a beautiful thing to see. But Thor was wading the middle of the stream, and Thor had spent long ages learning exactly one lesson about Loki, which is that he goes where he cannot possibly be going, and Thor's hand closed on him in the air. Salmon are slippery, and Loki slipped, but a salmon narrows toward the tail, and there at the narrowing the hand held, and that, say the old tellers, half asleep themselves by this point in the story, is why the salmon to this day has so slim and fine a tail, because Loki was caught by one once in the gray morning of the world, at the foot of a waterfall whose sound never stopped, and never has, and is very like the sound behind your thoughts right now, white and steady, and washing everything away. What was done with him then, the oldest tellings tell harshly, for they were made in a harsh age, and we will not carry their hardness into your night. Told gently from far away, it is this: the gods took Loki down into the deep of the earth, into a cavern under the roots of the mountains, a vast dim room of stone with the sound of water somewhere in it, always, and there they bound him, as his son had been bound, for that was the old sad rhyme of that family. Binding answering binding. The bonds they made for him were made out of what he had broken, the tellers say, out of grief gone hard as iron, and once they were laid across him, over the smooth stones of the cavern floor. They held as only grief holds, and the gods went away up into the light and did not look back, because there are things even gods cannot look at long. And above him, on a ledge of the stone, they set a serpent, and from the serpent's mouth, drop by drop, there fell a burning bitterness, slow as the drip of thaw from winter eves. That was the whole of his sentence, that dripping drop after drop through the dark of the underworld, each one a small hot star of pain falling toward his upturned face. It was meant to fall forever. It almost never fell at all, because Sigyn came, his wife, the quiet one, the one the story has kept folded away all this time like linen in a chest, saved for the hour of most need. She had been wronged as often as anyone in the 9 worlds, and no one would have wondered if she had stayed by her fire in Asgard, and let the door of that cavern stay closed on everything it held. Instead, she went down into the dark with a bowl in her 2 hands, and she found her place beside her bound husband, and she lifted the bowl over him, between his face and the falling drops. And she held it there, and the drops fell into the bowl, drop, and drop, and drop, And that is where she stayed, not for a night, not for a winter, but for ages of ages, the patience of her outlasting kingdoms above. Her arms learning the weight, her heart learning the rhythm. The two of them together in the dim stone room at the bottom of the world, listening to the water and the drops and each other's breathing. Only when the bowl was full at last would she move, turning away those few steps to pour it out into the stones. And in that little while, the drops that fell found his face, and Loki flinched against his bonds, and the whole earth felt it, and shivered gently, and folk in Midgard felt their floors tremble under them, and said, "Loki is turning over," and waited, and the trembling passed, because Sigyn always came back. Hold that at the very edge of sleep where you are lying now. The old people of the north felt the ground shake beneath their beds, the most frightening thing the earth can do. And the story they told their children about it was a story about a wife coming back with an empty bowl. Even their earthquakes, they wrapped in faithfulness. Even the shudder of the world they explained with love. And so the cavern became, in the long run of ages, almost a peaceful place, in the way that any place becomes peaceful where the same small sounds repeat forever. The far water murmuring, the drip meeting the bowl, the slow breathing of the bound one who slept in the end. A great deal, for even fire sleeps when it has burned all it has. And his dreams down there were long and strange and very old. Dreams of a birch wood in spring, of an 8-legged foal in new grass, of 3 children small again and unafraid in the dim ironwood, of a table where a one-eyed brother poured mead for 2. And Sigyn watched him dream, with the bowl filling slowly, one bright drop at a time, and said nothing, age after age, and her silence was not emptiness, it was the fullest thing in that whole deep room. Some loves argue, some loves save. Hers only stayed. Staying, too, is one of the great powers, though no hall was ever raised to it, and it holds up more of every world than the hammers do. Let your own breathing be like the water in that cavern, unhurried, going on and on without your help. The story is deep in its night now, and so are you. There is only one more turning left, the last and largest and gentlest of all, the one that carries everything away and brings everything back. You may hear it or you may sleep through it, and either way it will be well, because it ends, as you are about to, in a green and quiet morning. The end of the old world was not a secret. That is the strangest, calmest thing about these northern stories. Everyone in them knew how everything would end. The gods knew, the giants knew. The seeresses had sung it from the beginning, out of the deep wells under the tree. And knowing it, they all went on anyway, tending orchards, raising walls, holding bowls, loving what they loved. The end was called Ragnarök, the dusk of the powers, and because it was seen so long before it came, it has always been told the way we can safely tell it now, at the bottom of the night, not as something happening, but as something dreamed. Let it be only that. A dream the world once had a long time ago, about itself. In the dream, a winter comes that forgets to end. Snow after snow, 3 winters deep with no summers between, and the worlds grow very still and very white, and everything slows, the way everything in you is slowing now. In the dream, the old bonds grow tired at last, all of them at once, as if the whole tree sighed and loosened. On his far island the great wolf stretches, and the soft gray ribbon that held all the ages slips away like morning mist, and Fenrir walks free with his amber eyes full of the one dream he has dreamed for centuries. In the deep sea, the serpent lets go of his tail at last, and the tides that were his breathing rise and wander. And in the cavern at the bottom of the world, the bonds made of grief simply dissolve, their long work done, And Loki rises and takes Sigurd's hand a moment in the dark. They say nothing. There was never anything to say that her staying had not said. And then he goes up toward the gray light, to the sea, where a ship made of all the world's unfinished things is waiting to carry the last chapter to its shore. And the powers of the old world come together on one wide plain, all of them, everything this long night has told you of. Odin comes in his rain-cloud cloak, on 8-legged Sleipnir, the child of his brother's strangest kindness. And the wolf comes to meet him, and the deep one and the deep dreaming one go into the dream together and are gone, the way two waves fold into one another and are neither wave anymore. Thor meets the World Serpent at the edge of the sea, the two old wrestlers. And they end each other so gently, in this telling, that it is only a tide going out farther than it has ever gone, and not coming back. And at the last, at the very hinge of everything, two figures walk toward each other through the failing light, and they are Loki and Heimdall, the fire and the watchman, the one who opened every door, and the one who guarded the only bridge. They had been opposites since before the stories began, quickness and patience, flicker and vigil, and now the dream brings them together like a book closing, and each is the end of the other, and neither wins, because endings are not victories, they are only endings. The old flame and the old light go out in the same breath, and there is no sorrow in it anywhere. Because look, the whole dream is going out with them. The sun is swallowed softly, like a lamp carried into another room. The stars loosen and drift down the dark like snow. The great tree trembles through all its branches, and every leaf lets go, and the worlds slide quietly from their cradles into the deep, warm, original sea, and the waters close over the age of the gods without one splash, the way sleep closes over a day. And then there is nothing but the dark and the sea, and a great restfulness everywhere. For a time no one measured, because everyone who measured was asleep, and then because this is how the seeresses always ended the song. Softly, so softly, the earth rises again, green and washed and new. Out of the sea it comes a second time, mountains rinsed clean, valleys full of clear water, and the light that returns is the gentle kind, the first hour kind. Fields grow ripe by themselves there, with no one asking anything of them, and up from the quiet country of hell, released at last by the deep law now that all laws have been made new, comes Baldur, walking into the morning with Hodur his brother beside him, the blind one seeing now, or the world at last being kind to his blindness. The tellers were never sure and it never mattered, and everything that was lost in the oldest sorrow is simply back, unhurt, unhurtable. The game on the green field ended in the only way it could ever truly end, with everyone home. A few of the young gods remained, the sons of the old ones, and they walked together in the new grass talking quietly of everything that happened. All of it a story now, even to them, and in the deep grass they find, here and there, glinting, the golden game pieces the old gods used to play with on the first morning of the old world, lying where they fell, warm from the new sun. And they kneel down in the grass, and pick them up, and begin again. The sorrows are washed away in that world. The old tellers promised it, and lying where you are, deep in your pillow, with your breath slow and your hands heavy, you are allowed to believe them. Everything in this long story came to rest. The wolf's waiting ended. The serpent's circle opened into the wide new sea. The quiet queen closed up her lamplit hall at last, her every guest gone up into the light. Even the fire that could never be still, the quick, bright, unquiet flame this whole night was named for, went out gently at the end, Into the dark it had danced again so long, and where it went, the story does not follow. Perhaps nowhere. Perhaps into every hearth fire since, every candle, every warm flicker at the edge of every winter room, where someone tells an old tale to someone falling asleep. That would be like him, to end up everywhere, and small, and warm. The tree stands again in the blue dusk, new leaves, old roots. Dew gathers and falls and gathers. The worlds rock gently in their cradles of branch and shadow, and you are still here, held, at the very edge. There's nothing left to listen for. The story is whole now, and it will keep. It has kept for 1,000 years, and it will keep till morning. Let it all grow dim. The halls, the wall, the bridge of colors. Let them sink under the soft dark sea of sleep. The orchard is quiet. The lamps are low. The tide breathes in and out. Your breath is slow now. Your hands are heavy. The bed holds you, the way the branches held the worlds. Everything is finished. Everything is washed. Everything is green somewhere and waiting kindly, and not waiting for you. Let go of the story. It lets go of you gently. The night is deep and safe. Rest now. Sleep.